Part 76. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 751. Chapter 751 Return to the Nightmare. Xiaoling did not make this call for no reason. Not long after she put down the phone, she received a call from Li Lei. The positioning has been cracked. Shaohui is now somewhere on the high seas of the South Pacific. The sea area is vast and there is no cover. If a helicopter is dispatched to rescue, it will be too intimidating. We find another way. Xiaoling felt very uneasy. Although she had already guessed that there was a high possibility of Shaohui being kidnapped and going abroad, when the facts were really revealed to her, she still thought for a moment, the high seas meant no law, no order, no matter what the situation. What a terrible thing. Anything can happen. She asked Li Lei, who trained Shaohui. Is it from the Li family? Li Lei said, no, the investigation results show that it is a specialized master-slave transfer agency. It is supported by a huge military force and escorted by dignitaries from various countries. It floats on the high seas all year round and is elusive. It is known as the Paradise of Paradise. Elysium. Xiaoling held her breath and her face turned pale. She had heard about this organization, or rather, she had joined it. As a slave. In her last life, she was carried by Peizian to a branch venue in Paradise to undergo professional tests. It was the deepest nightmare among nightmares, and even thinking about it today makes people shudder. She knew what a cruel place it was. We must save Shaohui right away. She didn't want to wait for a moment. Li Lei pondered for a moment. The best way is to sneak in. Paradise is a membership system, and only the most advanced Supreme Black Card members can enter that high seas cruise ship. I will find a way to obtain the qualifications. You, Xiaoling asked, are you alone? Li Lei's voice was very slow. Xiaoling, I asked about the membership system there. The person who submits the membership application must have great interest and level in SM, and must perform, in front of the reviewer. He tried to speak tactfully. Xiaoling understood what he meant. To join the association, one must be a trainer or a slave. There is no third way. Her body was trembling uncontrollably. She understood the reason why Li Lei didn't want her to participate. The man knew what she had experienced in her previous life, and he was worried that she would collapse if she returned to the nightmare. How do you plan to join the party? She asked with difficulty. Li Lei has already thought about it. I have sent people to find experts in this field. I will learn from the experts how to become a tutor, and then find a slave to perform with me and pass the membership review. Xiaoling shook her head and said softly, it's too late. Li Lei asked, why is it too late? She looked out the window. In the distant night sky, the crescent moon was like a hook. The cool breeze of the late autumn night blew on my body, making me feel cold. She said, this city is so big, and there are only a few people who play this. The circle is too small, who doesn't know each other. If you rashly invite people, you will only alert the snake. Her eyes moved slightly, looking through the window of the villa not far away next door. Not far away from Pei's house, there lived Peizian, a senior member from Paradise. As long as he receives a little bit of disturbing news, who knows what will happen? She took 2 steps back and her body disappeared into the darkness. On the other end of the phone, Li Lei thought for a moment, maybe you are right. So far, my people have not found a suitable master candidate. It is easy to find an ordinary Tiao teacher. Paradise has specialized a beginner's desk for those new to the game. However, beginners cannot become Supreme Black Card members, and Supreme Black Cards are only available to true masters. In other words, only masters can go to that sea cruise ship. Besides, you can't find a suitable slave. She struggled to say those 2 words, closing her eyes, remembering the conversation she overheard when Peizian took her to that terrible club. From the conversations with those members, she learned that there were fewer slaves who qualified for the Supreme Black Card than the qualified SS. It would not be an exaggeration to call them rare, and they all had fixed masters, so they could not be found on a temporary basis. In her mind, a plan gradually emerged. Her body trembled even more. Lillet remained silent for longer this time, and she stopped speaking. In her heart, two forces of will were at war, one was the fear of the past, and the other was the maternal instinct and desire to save her child. Xiaoling, you can't go. Lillet, I'll go with you. I don't know how long it took, but the two of them spoke out at the same time. Lillet was startled and his breathing became rapid. Xiaoling, no, he knew how long the nightmare had been haunting her. It was not easy for her to get out of the nightmare. How could she fall into it again? But, she said, Lillet, the only one you can't find is me. Even if there was any other way, she was unwilling to go back to the nightmare. But having experienced all that, she understood better than anyone else that it was impossible for Lillet to find the right person in a short period of time, let alone spend time training him to become a master. In addition, Lillet also has to risk his partner's non-cooperation to save people after becoming a Supreme Black Card member and sneaking into the cruise ship. I'll tell you how to become a highly skilled tutor. Her voice was as light as a feather and she couldn't support it. She leaned her back against the rough wall, and I am already a very good slave. Some trauma is deeply imprinted into the soul. Even if she lives in another world, she still knows how to please and please her master. Pei destroyed her long ago. Now she is just a building rebuilt from the ruins of her soul. It is too fragile. Just push it down gently to reveal the darkness and filth buried deepest. She would rather go through it again than have Xiaowai become like her. She wrote a list to Lillet, prepare these things, and a confidential venue. Even if Lillet was unwilling, however, after waiting until dawn, his subordinates found nothing as Xiaoling expected, not even half of the senior teachers were found, so he had no choice but to agree to Xiaoling's plan. Xiaoling put on an everyday shirt, put on light makeup, and set off with her agent and assistant. News report, she went to the mountains to shoot outdoor scenes and will not return for about a month. After seeing the news, Mr. Li was very satisfied. He felt that this girl had a hard life, but she was also well behaved and sensible. She left the city to avoid the pursuit of her grandson. Unbeknownst to her, Xiaoling placed Lin Yunan and her assistant in a secret base, pretending to be making an announcement, and went in a big circle to rush to the place agreed with Lillet. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 752. Chapter 752 Her Sunshine. That's a secret base. Located deep in the mountains, surrounded by endless deciduous forests, the cold wind blows. She was alone and walked in. The heavy automatic sliding door closed silently behind her. There was a soft pop sound, as if to announce her arrival, and the white lights in the corridor gradually turned on, extending all the way to the depths of the mountain. She followed the light step by step, turned the corner, and her eyes suddenly opened up. It is a spacious space. The silver-white metal floor, four walls, and ceilings of the same material and color give people a cold and depressing feeling. There are various props on the ground and hanging on the walls, including collars, whips, handcuffs. All kinds of things, just to name a few. A man was standing in front of the props, seeming to be waiting for her, and seemed to be sizing up a bone whip with barbs in his hand. He was wearing a homely shirt. Under the thin cotton fabric, there were faint lines of undulating muscles, like a beast taking a nap, and it was filled with a sense of danger and oppression. Her steps stopped and her body was shaking a little. Lillet. She had never seen him like this before. He held a whip in his knuckled hands, his head slightly lowered, and his face looked contemplative. Under the soft silver-white light, he was inexplicably colder. Just like Pei Zion back then. Tenderness and cruelty can be switched in just a thought. Her body was shaking even more violently and she could hardly stand. Over there, the man had noticed her arrival and turned his head. Xiaoling, the low magnetic voice continued to echo in the silent metal space, forming a strange aftertaste. She subconsciously took 2 steps back. Li Lei put down his whip and walked towards her. How are you along the way? I asked people to seal off this area. There are only 2 of us in this space. It is very safe. Don't worry. She was not at ease at all and backed away like a frightened bird. At this moment, he was shocked to realize her fear and stopped. Xiaoling, his voice was softer, don't be afraid, I won't hurt you. He understood better than anyone else how terrifying it was for her to return to the training field, but there was no way, this was the only way they can rescue Xiao Hui is. He put on the least hostile look and looked at her with the utmost tenderness. For a long time, she took a deep breath with all her strength, suppressed the instinctive fear deep in her heart, and walked towards him step by step. I'm fine. She said with difficulty, Xiao Hui is still waiting for us, let's get started. The 2 were so close that their breathing could be heard. Her expression was still pale, and she stared at his handsome face without blinking, forcing herself not to catch sight of the horrific torture instruments on the surrounding walls even with her peripheral vision. Her breathing was rapid, her heartbeat was erratic, and she was sweating. Li Lei said warmly, relax, Xiaoling. Before we start, tell me what the safe word is. Safe word, she was too nervous to react for a moment. Li Lei was also slightly startled, I checked some information before coming here. I heard that such a game will set a safety time before starting to ensure the safety of the M side, that is, the slave side during the training process. The slave crying and begging for mercy are all a kind of fun, so even if you beg for mercy, the trainer will not stop. Unless the slave says a safe word, which is the only word that can make the trainer stop. Vocabulary agreed upon by both parties in advance to ensure the safety of slaves. Only then did Xiaoling understand what he was talking about. She looked a little dazed, and it was no wonder that she couldn't react. In Pei Zion's previous life, such words did not exist. During that purgatory year, even if her endurance reached the limit, that man would not show any mercy. All her screaming, struggling and crying could not bring back a glimmer of hope. Now, looking at Li Lei, her eyes were red and she almost shed tears. Li Lei noticed something was wrong with her. Xiaoling, what's wrong? Nothing, she shook her head in panic, thought for a moment, and said, just use sunshine. The man in front of her is the only ray of sunshine in her darkness. He led her out of the terrible nightmare of her previous life, and he will definitely be able to do the same now. This word can make her feel alive. Li Lei nodded, okay. Then, let's put on our clothes first. He picked up a set of leather clothes that he had already prepared, took off his thin cotton shirt and trousers, leaving only a pair of low-waisted black boxer briefs, and was about to put the leather clothes on. That needs to be taken off too, Xiaoling whispered. Li Lei was startled, and realized that she was referring to the boxers he was wearing. For some reason, his handsome face felt slightly hot. He looked at the leather suit in his hand. To be precise, it was just a few leather ropes connected to a few pieces of leather material that he didn't know what they were used for. It looked very strange. If you take off your boxers, what will this cover? Looking at his confused expression, Xiaoling laughed unconsciously, and her originally suppressed emotions relaxed a little. She said, I'm here to help you. You take it off first. The man in front of her was well proportioned and perfect, comparable to the world's top male models. Standing in front of her with this appearance, she couldn't help but blush. Li Lei really took off his clothes, and her perfect figure made her afraid to look at it. She took the thing in his hand and tried her best to focus on the thin leather rope and the leather, not even glancing at any other inch from the corner of her eye. Even so, My face was already red to the tips of my ears. "We are already an old married couple," he said with a gentle voice, laughing at her. "Why are you so shy?" "Who's old and married to you?" she spat at him. She didn't know how long ago it had been when she last saw his naked body. It was so far away that it seemed like a world away. Even if their son was already that old, but still shy, okay. Lilay laughed softly again. "You are so cute." "You're so cute." She became even more angry and tied the leather rope around his waist with all her might, wishing she could strangle the man to death. "Really, why do you have such a good figure when you have nothing to do? Is it tempting to commit a crime?" She was so angry that she didn't realize that with these few teasing, the atmosphere seemed to relax a lot. Her face was no longer pale, and the cold sweat no longer broke out on her forehead. Lilay looked down at her with gentle eyes. With great difficulty, she put on the leather coat for him. It would be more appropriate to say it was a leather coat, but it would be more appropriate to say it was a few pieces of postmodern abstract-style fabric. The set of scattered ropes and leather materials only barely covered him. The key parts of the body, large areas of chest and long legs are exposed, and the well-proportioned and tight muscles are simply criminal. She felt the blood on the top of her head welling up. Her face was so red that it could boil her, and she looked away. "That won't work," he chuckled. "Look more often and get used to it, otherwise you won't be able to pass the review when you get to the club. This is the makeup update I owed you before. In addition to this update, I still owe you 9 more updates," with tears streaming down my face. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Sci-fi. Chapter 753. Chapter 753 Healing Her Injuries. She glared at him hard before ignoring his nonsense. Lilay rummaged through a pile of props for a long time and picked up another outfit. "This is for you. This outfit is different from the one he is wearing. Almost all the places that can be covered are covered, and only some skin on the calf and waist is symbolically exposed. Even less revealing than the dress she wore on the red carpet." She took it. "This." I said. "You will be safe," Lilay said. Their goal is to obtain the Supreme Black Card membership. If both of them dress too conservatively, it will make the club suspicious of their perversion. And if one person dresses very revealingly and the other person dresses more conservatively, it doesn't matter. This can be regarded as a complementary and coordinated match. Lilay chuckled. "I dress myself like this just for you." Xiaoling glared at him again, but a warm current arose in her heart. This man always considers her in ways that even she didn't expect. Perhaps this is the reason why she still doesn't want to forget him after experiencing so much hurt over the years. Her hands touched the buttons of her coat before she wanted to change her clothes. Suddenly, she remembered something and glared at Lilay even more fiercely than before. "Turn around and don't look back." Okay, Lilay knew that she was shy, so he didn't take it seriously and turned around. Xiaoling slowly changed her clothes, but she couldn't put them on calmly. This is not a question of exposure or not. This is a symbol of her return to darkness. Those horrific memories from the previous life have come back, and they are just illusions. Mr. Li's cruel move took her Shui to a place she would never want to set foot in, making it impossible for her to do anything but make preparations before rescuing people. Her hands were shaking more and more violently, and finally she couldn't help it and threw the outfit far away. A clang sound. Lilay turned around and said, "Xiaoling. Don't look at me." She covered her face and squatted in the corner, curling up helplessly like an embarrassed little animal. Lilay's eyes darkened slightly. He walked forward and squatted down in front of her. He knew what she was afraid of, and what happened in her previous life. He understood how much courage it took for her to put on this dress now. He reached out his hand, held her in his arms, and spoke to her in his gentlest voice. She said, "Xiaoling, don't be afraid, I'm here." The most genial comfort. She struggled up and shouted with a cry, "Let me go." She didn't want him to see her appearance at this time, as if she was showing the unbearable time in front of the one she loved without any obstruction. Blood, it's dripping and tragic, leaving no way out. She didn't want him to know. However, he did not let go of the hand holding her. Instead, he tightened it, as firm as a mountain. "It's okay, it's okay," he said over and over again, "I'm here, everything is with me." Maybe it was because his arms were too warm, or maybe his voice was too gentle. She finally stopped trembling and lifted herself up in his arms. A tearful face. "I don't want this," she said, "I don't want this." He ran his palms along her long hair and said, "Then let's think of another way." She fell silent. What other way? No, it was too late. Xiaowei was in danger every minute and every second on that cruise ship. No one knew what would happen. The time left for them is very tight, and they cannot afford to delay at all. She bit her lip, pushed away from his arms, and put the outfit back on. "I must wear it." Her voice was haggard and weak. Li Lei frowned, not wanting her to force herself, but he also knew in his heart that this was the best plan. He said, "I'll help you." He was worried that if no one helped, she wouldn't even be able to stand. Xiaoling hesitated, knowing that she was in a bad state, and nodded. Darkness is back again. Her body trembled again, and she used all her strength to restrain herself from pushing Li Lei's hand away. Companies. Very soft sound. Li Lei felt his hand wet. When he pulled it back, he saw scarlet blood on it. He turned her body around and said, "Xiaoling." Under the silver-white light, her face was paler than the light, with only a hint of red at the corner of her lips, which she had bitten with her own teeth. She looked embarrassed, looking at him in a daze, and even her voice was hollow. "I'm fine, you, move faster." She didn't know how long she could hold on before she collapsed. Li Lei was heartbroken. He had sworn not to let her get hurt at all, but he didn't expect that in the end, she would still have to go back to the endless nightmare. He speeded up, adjusted her clothes, and held her in his arms. "Okay," he said softly, "you're safe." She breathed a sigh of relief, her body softened, and she collapsed in his arms. Li Lei caught her. Her body trembled slightly, and she instinctively wanted to push him away, but for some reason she seemed to have lost all her strength and could not even lift a little finger. She closed her eyes, like two beasts dependent on each other, one gently healing the other. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. With great difficulty, he finally cleaned up the blood stains between her lips. "Don't hurt yourself again," his voice was low, "I will feel bad." She shook her head slowly, "I'm fine, let's make the next plan. This is the first of 3 normal updates today. I'm going to eat, the next update will be around 10 o'clock. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 754. Chapter 754 How to Give Up. Li Lei looked at the whip and then at her. In the spacious silver-white metal hall, her petite body looked so thin and fragile, as if she could be knocked down by the sound of the weapon breaking through the air with just a slight swing of the whip. She looked pale and began to bite her lips unconsciously again. His body was trembling slightly, but he still stood in front of him. Even though he was so scared, he didn't flinch at all. Li Lei raised his whip high. She looked even paler and closed her eyes. Unexpectedly, after waiting for a long time, the expected pain has not subsided. She couldn't help but opened her eyes with some panic, and saw that he was still standing there, maintaining the whip-raising posture, and the cold silver-white light shone on his handsome, sculpture-like face, silently. "What are you waiting for?" she asked softly. Li Lei walked toward her step by step. She looked at the whip in the man's hand and backed away subconsciously. Until her back hit the cold wall, she could no longer retreat. Li Lei stopped half a step away from her, looking down at the pale and delicate girl in front of him. Wrapped in a dark black matte metal leather outfit, she was trembling, as if she was restrained by the thick bottomless darkness, unable to be free or breathe, and her slightly widened eyes were filled with fear. He didn't know what would happen if the whip really fell. Perhaps, she will no longer be her, and he will no longer be him, and they will never be able to go back to the past. This kind of terrifying and dangerous game can easily destroy people's minds. Li Lei is afraid that he will lose control and become a demon like Pei Zion. Back then, the deep love between Pei Zion and her could be wiped out by this terrifying game. He really didn't have the courage to do so. I am confident that after inflicting such harm to Xiaoling, she can still love herself. He can't afford to gamble. Li Lei turned the handle of the whip over and handed it to Xiaoling's hand. There is no rule that a slave must be a woman, right? I will be your slave, Xiaoling. With me, you will always be free. She didn't expect him to do this, so she stared at him blankly for a while before she realized what she was doing. Tears fell without warning. No man in the world had ever done this for her, not even Pei Zion. And Li Lei, he was such a proud man at heart, but he was willing to put down his pride for her. To be precise, he became a slave, as low as dust. Do you understand what this means? Her voice was soft and hoarse. Li Lei, being a slave is not as simple as you think. I can whip you, humiliate you, make you kneel, and order you crawling like an animal, even letting you lick my toes. Her voice suddenly stopped and she took a breath. Is it like this? Opposite her, the man knelt down at some point, wearing a leather jacket that could barely cover her body. He lowered his head and kissed her toes with his lips reverently. She had just put on slave attire and did not wear shoes. Waves of electric-like numbness ran up her exposed toes, making it almost unbearable for her. Stop, stop, she said weakly. Li Lei stopped, still kneeling, and raised his head to look at her. I can do a good job, master, I belong to you unknowingly. He even changed his title, but he didn't feel anything. Humiliation and discomfort. For him, this is not a shame, it is a man's responsibility to protect the woman he loves. And if she collapses because she can't stand such a game, that will be his lifelong shame. So, the dangerous role, let him come. Xiaoling looked at him blankly, as if she had just met him for the first time today. She didn't know what she was feeling now, even if she had done some mental construction 1,000 times beforehand and imagined all the possible consequences, such as her going crazy, her collapse, her screaming and crying to quit. But the only thing I didn't expect was that she would become the master. And the man at his feet who is 10,000 times more powerful than himself will willingly become a slave. She held the whip in her hand unconsciously and was at a loss. What's wrong? Master Li Lei still looked up at her, his voice gentle and gentle. Don't hesitate, don't be afraid, I will cooperate with all your instructions. We still have to rescue Xiao Hui, there is not much time is wasting here, let's get started. She just came back to her senses. Yes, they still have to rescue Xiao Hui. She was not sure how long it would take to get into the role if she became a slave. She might even collapse completely. And what about Li Lei? At least on the surface, he has adapted well and is much more emotionally stable than her. If he is used as a slave, their training will progress much faster. She said, Li Lei, I'm sorry. Li Lei smiled at her. I said, I am yours. He stared at her with a pair of deep eyes, like a devout believer gazing at his goddess. To him, she was everything. Xiaoling closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and adjusted herself. After a moment, when I opened my eyes again, I was already in the middle of the drama. The first thing I want to teach you. She raised her whip and struck him mercilessly. to the master, use you. In the silver-white, cold, and empty metal hall, she stood high, like a queen. This training took a day and a night, and Lilei adapted well. And after several psychological conflicts, she gradually mastered the skills needed to become a good master. She ordered Lilei to stand up and release the training mode. Take a rest, she said. We are almost ready, we can go to Elysium to apply for a black card membership. Lilei nodded and moved his body, which was a little sore from sitting on his knees for a long time. His figure is still as perfect as before he received training. There are only a few bruises on his strong wheat-colored skin that will soon dissipate. After going to paradise, no one will notice the injuries. This is not all because of Xiaoling's perfect technique. Her strength and skills in holding the whip are still somewhat flawed. But he has rough skin and thick flesh, unlike her delicate skin, which invisibly offsets many mistakes. Xiaoling looked at him guiltily. I'm sorry for making you suffer like this. There's nothing I'm sorry about, he interrupted her and smiled at her. Xiaoling, I love you. I've been yours for a long time. This time, it's just a ritual to make this clear from the outside. She didn't know if he was comforting her or if he really thought so. She only felt that her nose was a little sore, and she had a premonition that maybe she would never be able to leave Lilei again in this life. I have been yours for a long time. This sentence is like a magic spell. Since he is hers, like a part of her life, like the continuation of her limbs, like another soul of hers, following him like a shadow, how can she give it up? Next chapter before 12 o'clock. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 755. Chapter 755, Entering Paradise. After resting for a night, they drove to the branch venue of Paradise the next day. She wore a leather outfit and a delicate and ornate mask studded with gems, hiding her impressive celebrity face behind the mask. In her hand, she held a long leather rope, and the leather rope was connected to the collar around Lilei's neck. Lilei was also wearing the same outfit and mask as yesterday, and followed her tamely. The two of them entered Paradise. Welcome. The staff of Paradise came out and greeted them politely. Dear madam, is there anything I can do for you? He mainly looked at Xiaoling, and Lilei. Sorry, in the eyes of people in Paradise, slaves are not considered human beings, they are just appendages of their masters. Xiaoling's voice came out through the voice changer. The timbre was very different from before, but it was still cold and cold. I heard that there are some interesting activities on your cruise ship. I plan to go and check it out. When she spoke, she felt natural. She exudes an aura, which is the unparalleled dominance she has formed by standing in the spotlight for many years. As long as she wants, she can become the focus of everyone anytime and anywhere, with alluring grace and aura of a queen. Like an S-class perfect master. The staff evaluated her calmly in their hearts. The guests here came and went, so they, the staff, were well informed and had long been immune to such perverts who called themselves masters. But the woman in front of me was different. There was no deliberate coercion in her voice, and it was even a bit lazy and casual. But when she spoke, she seemed to have a natural arrogance, and she was born to be noble. Let the staff almost fall and surrender. The staff was shocked, secretly alert, and guarded their minds. In a blink of an eye, I was already filled with admiration for the woman in front of me. It is rare to be able to be a trainer to this extent. I think there must be many people who are jealous and want to be her slave. She didn't know how virtuous and capable her slave was, but he was so lucky to have such a perfect master. The staff member looked behind her. Lilei is very tall, a full head taller than Xiaoling. His wheat-colored skin is strong and well-proportioned, and his slender limbs and tight muscles are full of tension, which actually gives people a dangerous feeling like a beast. At this time, this beast was held docilely by its owner. It showed no intention of breaking free from the collar around its neck. It even seemed to enjoy it. It stared deeply at its owner with a pair of deep eyes, not missing every move of its owner. Even the blind man could see the admiration in his eyes. The staff found out they were wrong. This slave is not lucky to have such a perfect queen as his master. But this queen is equally lucky to have such a perfect slave. It is simply a match made in heaven. What, is there a problem? The woman's arrogant voice sounded again, a little impatient. Ah, no, no, the staff member came to his senses and found that he had been staring at the person for a long time, which was very impolite. He quickly said to Xiaoling, "You haven't been a member of Paradise before, have you? It's very easy to get on that cruise ship. You just need to pass the test and become our Supreme Black Card member. Is it very simple?" The woman raised her lips slightly, tugging on the rope holding the slave in her hand as if she was bored, and said to the staff, "My patience is limited, so let's proceed now." Actually, testing is not simple. But when the staff saw such a perfect master and slave, they had no doubt that they were masters. For masters, such a test is a piece of cake. He took them to a room dedicated to testing. Xiaoling is very nervous. Whether she can get on the cruise ship to rescue Xiaowai or not depends on it. Li Lei could see her nervousness, and looked at her with gentler and more admiring eyes. "Master," he said to her, kneeling down with reverence, "I am yours forever. I belong to you far away. Wherever you go, I will go." Xiaoling heard his subtext, and her panicked heart strangely calmed down. She raised her hand and began to perform. The test lasted for about an hour, and the result was perfect. Both of them got the Supreme Black Card and could board the cruise ship at any time. Xiaoling didn't want to waste another second, so she immediately asked the Paradise to prepare a helicopter and sent her and Li Lei directly to the cruise ship on the high seas. The helicopter stopped on the deck of the cruise ship. Wearing a mask, she stepped onto the deck under Li Lei's attentive service. The 12-centimeter stiletto heels sparkled with diamonds, and the clear eyes behind the mask made him look like a king. The moment she came slowly, everyone nearby, whether guests or staff, turned around and looked at this noble and arrogant queen-like figure, as well as the slave beside her who was guarding her like a beast. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "The legendary Peacock Queen." The Peacock Queen is a famous figure in the circle. Beside, someone shook his head. "Peacock Queen? That woman is too coquettish. How can she have such an ascetic and arrogant aura as this one? I think she is more difficult to deal with than the Peacock Queen." "I think so," another companion nodded. "You're new here, right? You haven't seen him before. Most of the guests here are wearing masks. After all, most of the people who can board this luxury cruise ship are famous people, who may have been exposed in public places or in the news somewhere. Many of them are very taboo about having their special quirks discovered, so wearing masks and voice changers are standard here." "Wearing a mask, who knows if I've seen him before," another guest said, leading his slave in the direction of Xiaoling. "Why don't you say hello and take a look?" Several other guests also agreed and looked at their companions to strike up a conversation. "Hi," the man walked up to Xiaoling and said hello easily. "Hello, madam, do I have the honor to meet you? My name is Lihuo Hongying, you can call me Hongying just like that." They will hide their faces and voices, and most of the people here will also use nicknames so as not to reveal their real names. Xiaoling had already been educated on these details by the staff of Paradise on her way here. At this time, her voice was a little careless and lazy. "Are you interested in me, or are you interested in my slave?" She glanced at Red Eagle and the slave in his hand with some sarcasm, showing off a superior and arrogant person. The queen performed it vividly. "You are the master and I am also the master. I don't think you have any interest in me other than coveting my slave. This is the training circle. Just like men and women in heterosexual relationships and homosexual relationships, it is divided into masters and slaves. One master and one slave must be paired together. Two masters or two slaves with the same attributes can never form a pair, and there is no such thing as chatting or chasing. Hearing this, Red Eagle smiled. Okay, I admit, I do have a little interest in your slave. Last update today, good night everyone. For the sake of how cute I am, can you please give me a monthly pass? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xiaoweiniang. Chapter 756. Chapter 756 The Taste of the Young Master. Xiaoling's voice was calm. There are many people who are interested in him. She turned slightly sideways, stretched out her long white fingers to touch Li Lei's face through the mask, and her slave looked down at her intently, with admiration in his eyes. A very perfect pair. Even the well-informed Red Eagle was filled with admiration in his heart. Although there are many people in this circle, there are very few who can find the top master or slave. However, the two people in front of him don't even have to watch them torture. The skills used when people are being tortured, just standing together, just a look or a movement can make people hold their breath and make their heart beat faster. The interest in Hongying's eyes became a little stronger. He looked at Xiaoling. How about making friends? In the circle, it is very common to exchange slaves. Maybe one day when she is tired of playing, she can exchange this perfect slave for him to play with. To put it bluntly, even if she couldn't get the slave, it would be better to exchange experiences. He was very curious about how she could train the slave to be like this. It's a pity that Xiaoling seems to have seen through his mind. Her hand withdrew from Li Lei's body with some boredom, and tugged on the leather rope holding his collar. I'm not used to making friends. Her voice was still lazy and casual. Don't try to take advantage of my slave. As he spoke, he walked elegantly past Hongying on 12-centimeter stiletto heels. Li Lei looked at her admiringly the whole time, seemingly turning a deaf ear to everything happening around him. At this moment, when he saw his master walking away, he stretched out his long legs with tight muscles to follow. There were whistles along the way. Although the owner of the slave dresses more conservatively than most people, the slave wears so little that everyone can clearly see his almost naked wheat-colored skin, which is as explosive as a beast. Muscles and perfectly proportioned waist and hips. With the pace, his muscle lines rippled, making people blush and heartbeat. Tisk, Red Eagle just returned to the group of companions when he heard one of his companions say, "That slave's figure makes someone look pregnant." "How about it, Red Eagle, have you found out the details of this slave?" Hongying shook his head regretfully. That lady doesn't seem to like making friends. But he narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the direction Xiaoling and the two left for a while, and smiled. I see her slave body doesn't look like it was built in the gym. The muscles developed in the gym are very different from the muscles developed by fighting with real swords and guns on the battlefield. Even if ordinary people can't see it, in the eyes of this group of people, it is easy to distinguish. His companion nodded. They are in trouble. Hongying also nodded. That pervert Li Feng is also on board, and that slave is his favorite type. Li Feng has a very good reputation here. Even in this circle where perverts gather, he is known as the pervert among perverts. It can be seen from the fact that he doesn't wear a mask or a pseudonym. He doesn't bother to hide his true identity and hobbies from the world at all. He is extremely wanton and arrogant. Legend has it that the slaves who fell into his hands did not end well. Most of them are missing. Some people have seen half-smashed heads and severed limbs on the high seas, attracting sharks to chase them. There are also a small number of people who are more lucky and come back alive, but without exception they are in a daze and go crazy and cry when others ask them. They either end up in a mental hospital or leave the community forever. Young Master Li ruins so many slaves every year, and the amount of compensation he pays to Paradise is an astronomical sum. Why, I remember that he just bought 2 good slaves from Paradise a few days ago, and he bought them again so quickly. Are you back looking for prey? One of Red Eagle's companions sighed. Many of the people here brought their own slaves on board the ship. In addition, Paradise also provides slave trading services. The origins of these slaves are unknown, but one thing is certain, no one cares about the life and death of these slaves, and they will die when they die. Hong Ying stroked his slave's chin, ordered her to kneel down, and used her body to build a stool for herself. After sitting down firmly, he replied slowly, I was also present when Li Feng bought those 2 slaves last time. He didn't seem satisfied at that time, saying that those 2 were too weak and their skin color was not healthy enough. The muscles are not strong enough, I am afraid that it will not last for 2 weeks. Sure enough, it is not even 2 weeks yet, and the companions around me shuddered. Someone lowered his voice, this young master of the Li family is so cruel and ruthless. Someone else shook their heads, who knows, his criteria for selecting slaves are very similar to those of a human being. Everyone was silent. This was an unspoken secret circulated in the circle, the slaves who were tortured to death by Li Feng were more or less similar to his brother Li Lei. There were rumors that Li Feng hated his younger brother to the core of his bones, and there were also rumors that this was a perverted feeling. The truth is unknown. No one has ever dared to ask Li Feng face to face about this issue. Once upon a time, someone asked something about him, and the next day, his body was hung on the gate. What are you talking about? Change the subject, Hong Ying said. It was really scary to talk about this pervert all the time. Everyone thought so and quickly changed the topic, and the depressing atmosphere gradually improved. Xiaoling took Li Lei from place to place on the cruise ship. The cruise ship is very large and has countless places. There are halls for people to watch special performances, hidden cabins for exchanging slaves, places for wine tasting and flirting, as well as large and small gambling tables, prop sales outlets, and human body banquet halls, etc. Xiaoling was very anxious and just wanted to find Xiao Hui quickly. However, in full view of the public, she could not act too eagerly. She could only stroll past casually with a serious look on her face, and from time to time she had to deal with other members who came to chat with her. Finally, I visited all the places on this cruise ship that are open to members. No, nothing. Let alone Xiaowai, they rarely even see children. Xiaoling became irritated, walked to a secluded corner in the corridor on the 3rd floor, and let out a heavy breath. Don't worry, Li Lei comforted her, knowing that she was in a bad mood, we are already here. We will definitely find Xiao Hui. He should be in the hands of the staff of G Paradise now. Let's ask about the park's human trafficking. Class information. Xiaoling nodded, that was all she could do now. The 2 were talking, and over there, Red Eagle walked up slowly and with his slave girl. Seeing Xiaoling and the 2 at the other end of the corridor, he was slightly startled, and then showed a charming smile. Hey, what a coincidence, we meet again. The previous one was blocked because it was too dirty. 555 Where am I dirty? The sheets haven't even been rolled yet. Tears streaming down my face. The blocked chapter has been modified, and I am applying to be unblocked. I don't know when it will be unblocked. Please wait patiently. I will send a notice when the block is lifted. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 757. Chapter 757 Rhetoric. It was a coincidence that just when she wanted to inquire about information, someone came to her door. In a blink of an eye, she had lost her anxious expression and returned to a somewhat lazy and arrogant look, like a Persian cat with its claws restrained, leaning back in the arms of her male slave. She said a little casually, "We meet again." Hong Ying was keenly aware of her difference and half-jokingly said, "Why, your high and mighty queen, who just ignored me on the deck, is now interested in talking." Xiaoling casually played with the leather rope around Li Lei's neck. "It's boring here." Hong Ying smiled. Many people who came to paradise for the first time praised it full of praise. Under Xiaoling's delicate mask, the exposed light-colored lips curved in a slight arc, and she did not hide her sarcasm. "Is this the only level of paradise? There is nothing special." "Something special." Red Eagle narrowed his eyes slightly. "What do you want?" Under the sun, he saw the woman lazily straightening up from the arms of the male slave behind her, revealing a vaguely visible waist, as fair and smooth as a girl's. Her slave took out a black gauze shawl, lowered his head and put it on her respectfully, just enough to block Red Eagle's view of her body. Hong Ying laughed. "Don't you think it's overstepping your bounds?" He found that the male slave didn't seem to care at all that he was nearly naked. He followed the mistress with admiring eyes all the time. When he noticed that someone was coveting the mistress, he immediately covered her with clothes. Black tulle. Today, Xiaoling has no skin exposed on her body, and she is even more abstinent than abstinent. Hong Ying looked into Xiaoling's eyes. "You slave, you are very jealous." Xiaoling didn't seem to care at all, and even touched the male slave's cheek with approval. "I just like how he is so nervous about me all the time." Her voice was as soft as the spring breeze. Hong Ying smiled again. "He seems to be your master." Xiaoling also laughed. "Really, it bothers me to be said like that." She pulled the chain, and the male slave knelt down tamely. His humble posture made Hong Ying think that the doubt he just had was just hallucination. Xiaoling's tone returned to boredom. "It's troublesome to have to go out for a walk to arouse his jealousy in front of outsiders. In order to make it easier to see how nervous he is about me," Xiaoling said with a smile, "I decided to buy another slave." "Is it a good idea to let two slaves be jealous?" "This is a good idea," Red Eagle said appreciatively. "Most people here only own one slave, because training just one slave takes a lot of energy. But it is not ruled out that some people will keep two or even more slaves, which is also a kind of fun." Xiaoling sighed. "I heard that there were slaves for sale in paradise, so I came over to take a look." "Unfortunately." She shook her head. "Those slaves are so disappointing. How can they be as good as 1/10,000th of mine?" Hearing what she said, Li Lei raised his head in cooperation and looked at his master gratefully. Hong Ying felt that this master and slave were indeed a match made in heaven. It would be too difficult to find another qualified slave to insert between them. He asked Xiaoling, "Have you seen all the slaves in the garden?" Xiaoling said, "I looked at the slave chamber of commerce on the first floor, and there is nothing good." "That's right," Red Eagle smiled. "No wonder you feel bored. The slaves on the first floor are all ordinary goods. If you want to see the real high-end goods, there is a slave auction here every month. It's a coincidence that you're here. The next show is at midnight tonight." Xiaoling's eyes brightened slightly. She asked Red Eagle, "What kind of slaves are there at the auction?" "Gender, weight, age." Hong Ying said, "Every auction is different. In the history of the auction, there have been male slaves, female slaves, and even transvestites. The oldest is 70 or 80 years old, and the youngest—" He tilted his head and recalled, "The one a year ago, a 4-year-old girl was auctioned." Xiaoling's heart skipped a beat. "In other words, children are being sold here." She suppressed waves of disgust and asked casually, "Girl? Is there a boy?" "Why not?" Hong Ying laughed again, but looked at the male slave at her feet with some doubts. The male slave was strong. He looked like a master in a hail of bullets. He could do anything without being a slave. The tough physique of a special soldier. "You like boys?" "Children are very fragile, not as durable as your family." Xiaoling felt even more nauseated and almost vomited. She finally suppressed the overwhelming feeling and said calmly, "It's good to change the taste occasionally." Hong Ying glanced at her and shrugged, "It's up to you." The two chatted for a while. Under Xiaoling's questioning, Hong Ying told her everything she knew. He told her the specific time and place of the auction, precautions, etc. At the end, he also told her, "Wait for you to change. I don't want this male slave anymore," he pointed at Li Lei, "remember to come to me." Xiaoling said perfunctorily, "Okay." Hong Ying was still worried, "By the way, there is a person here that you must avoid. His name is Dash." He was just about to tell her about Li Feng, otherwise, once Li Feng sets his sights on such a top-quality slave, his name is, how could he, Red Eagle, take over? "Everyone, please step aside, okay." However, just as he was speaking halfway, a companion called him over there. "Coming, coming," he hurriedly went down, leaving Xiaoling in suspense. Xiaoling couldn't think about Hong Ying's unfinished words. As soon as Hong Ying left, she felt as if she was paralyzed. She staggered back a few steps, her back pressed against the wall, and retched with a wow sound. "There was nothing in my stomach, and all I vomited was acidic water." Li Lei supported her. "Xiaoling, are you okay?" She gasped for a long time and then said weakly, "It's okay. The information that Red Eagle told her just now was too disgusting." Although she knew that children were detained here before coming here, when she heard with her own ears that the Elysian paradise had treated such catching a small child to tame and train him is another feeling. Li Lei hugged her and said, "Our Xiaowei will be fine." She also prayed in her heart, hoping that Xiaowei would be safe and sound, and asked Li Lei, "What should we do next?" In terms of rescuing people, Li Lei is obviously more professional. When she was talking to Hong Ying just now, he had already thought of the next plan. Red Ying just said that there is an auction catalog in the park. Let's get a catalog first and take a look. See if Xiaowei is there. If so, it's easy, just buy it back. However, Li Lei felt that the second possibility was more likely. "Since Grandpa told you that as long as you leave me, he will ensure that the child is safe, then the child is probably not included in the auction list. It is very likely that the child is simply detained." End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 758. Chapter 758, Appreciating but Not Useful. "What should we do?" she asked in panic. Li Lei's voice was very calm. "Let's take a look at the auction list first to rule out the possibility of the child being auctioned. Then you go back to your room to rest. Each group of guests here has their own exclusive guest room." Li Lei continued, "I walked around and explored all the unexplored areas on this cruise ship. This is the fastest way to find Xiaohui." Xiaoling had no better idea, so she followed Li Lei. The two of them came to the auction venue. Since it was not yet the auction time, the venue was very quiet. There were only a few staff entertaining the guests who came to ask for the auction list. Xiaoling walked over with Li Lei and asked the staff for a directory. She opened it and looked at it carefully. The directory was beautifully made and printed on fine-grained vellum paper. There were 9 copies in total, each with a picture of a slave printed on it. Among them, 7 are adults and the other 2 are children. They are all little girls. There is no Xiaowei. Xiaoling breathed a sigh of relief. The staff asked respectfully, "Madam, is there anything else we can help you with?" Xiaoling's voice was clear and cold, maintaining the image of a superior queen. "No need." She led her male slave and walked elegantly out of the venue on high heels. He was facing someone, but he bumped into someone. "Yo!" The man protracted his voice, and his voice was as smooth and familiar as a snake's, which made Xiaoling startled. "That is." She raised her head and saw the face that she would never forget. Sure enough, it was Li Feng. He was the only guest that Xiaoling had seen on this cruise ship who didn't wear a mask or use a voice changer. He was wearing a rich Chinese-style brocade robe, and his black hair was a little long, with his hair at the top. It is a pair of narrow and charming eyes, shining with a cold snake-like luster. Xiaoling stopped and used all her strength to restrain herself from retreating. Li Feng looked at her and smiled softly. Yes, it's rare to meet someone who is not afraid of me. As soon as he finished saying this, his eyes skipped over her and looked at the male slave Li Lei behind her. At this time, Li Lei wore a mask on his face. Under the black leather rope was wheat-colored skin with a healthy luster. His muscles were well proportioned and firm, full of a sense of danger and explosive power like a napping beast. Li Feng's narrow eyes narrowed. He took a few steps closer to Li Lei and stretched out his sickly pale fingers to lift his chin. Xiaoling waved his hand away first. Don't you know it's very impolite to touch without the master's permission? She tried hard to control her voice, not to tremble, and acted lazy and arrogant, blocking Li Lei's face. Staring directly at Li Feng. Li Feng seemed a little surprised. Interesting, little girl, do you know who I am? Do I need to know who you are? Xiaoling exerted her acting skills to the extreme, wishing that she was possessed by all the movie kings and queens in the world to prevent Li Feng from discovering their true identities. She didn't know why she was so unlucky to meet a pervert like Li Feng. But she knew that nothing good would happen every time she met this pervert. She raised her head and looked at Li Feng coldly. On the other hand, the staff on the side were extremely nervous and ran over wiping their sweat. Mr. Li, this is the first time this lady has come to paradise. If I have caused any offense, I hope you will forgive me. Then he turned to Xiaoling. Said, this is Mr. Li Feng, none of us here will offend him. As he spoke, he winked at Xiaoling. The staff really wanted to do good to Xiaoling. Anyone who offended Li Feng would have a bad end. He didn't want the big customer that Paradise just welcomed to die inexplicably. Unexpectedly, Xiaoling didn't appreciate it and still protected Li Lei. Of course she knew who Li Feng was and how perverted he was, but she couldn't give in because behind her was her most beloved man, and she wasn't sure what would happen if she stepped away. Li Feng smiled thoughtfully, his tongue as smooth as a snake stretched out and licked the corners of his bright red mouth. If it were on other occasions, I might be interested in playing with you, but here. I didn't see how he acted. He suddenly got angry and waved Xiaoling away. Xiaoling felt a heavy force coming towards her. She had no time to react and staggered back. Just as he was about to fall to the ground, suddenly, he felt why he caught it. Li Lei. He didn't know when he appeared behind her to prevent her from falling and getting hurt. Master, are you okay? His loyal voice. Xiaoling looked pale and shook her head. Over there, Li Feng was slowly walking towards them. Good skills. Li Feng clapped gently, with a smile of unknown meaning on his face, falling on Li Lei's almost naked body. What a loyal slave, you remind me of a person. Li Lei looked at him coldly, wearing a mask, and his voice came out from the voice changer, no one can hurt my master. Really? Li Feng chuckled and looked him up and down. Be my slave. He used a command sentence, not a question. Impossible. Li Lei refused without thinking, supported Xiaoling and walked out. Li Feng looked at their backs with interest, and the smile on his face deepened. Beside him, there was a frail slave who was suffering from unknown torture. He seemed to be unable to stand firmly and was teetering on the verge of falling down at any time. Li Feng watched Xiaoling and Li Lei disappear at the door, turned his head, glanced at his slave with disgust, and kicked the slave without any warning. Look at me, look at you. He suddenly became furious and kicked the slave several times, who was groaning in pain. What kind of trash are you? The dull sound of flesh being struck echoed in the venue. There was also the sound of ribs breaking. After a while, the slave who was kicked and beaten by the strong wind died. Li Feng still couldn't understand his hatred and kicked the corpse until it was deformed. There were lumps everywhere on the high-end teak floor. Several staff members stood nearby and watched young Master Li kicking people to death. Such scenes seemed commonplace to them, and no one stepped forward to stop him. Finally, Li Feng finally stopped. A staff member brought a delicate porcelain basin and a white towel, and said respectfully to Li Feng, "Mr. Li, please wash your hands. It will be bad if you get dirty, so we will clean the place." Li Feng slowly washed his hands. Someone had already knelt down and cleaned his blood-stained leather shoes with water and shoe polish. The staff member said cautiously, "Is this the slave you bought more than a week ago? Since he is dead, do you want to pick another slave?" Li Feng snorted from his nose, "They are all useless things." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 759. Chapter 759 Auction. The whole place was silent. The staff members were so scolded by him that they lowered their heads and did not dare to speak out. A charming yet cold smile appeared on Li Feng's lips, and he whispered like a snake, "Take me to your backstage," hoping to find a few interesting items. His eyes were not limited to the auction. For the 9 slaves in the manual, you must know that in addition to the 9 slaves in paradise, there are many untamed quasi-slaves obtained from various channels, and Li Feng is already so impatient that he will not let go of those kinds of slaves. The staff was obedient and took him to the backstage. Over there, Xiaoling also brought Li Lei back to their exclusive room. It is worthy of being a room prepared for Supreme Black Card members. When you open the door, you will find an extremely spacious and luxurious room. It is covered with thick gold velvet carpets and the king-size bed is right in the center, which is particularly eye-catching. Behind the bed, there is an entire wall of floor-to-ceiling glass windows, one-way glass. Looking from inside, you can have an unobstructed view of the deck and the blue sea. However, people outside cannot see anything inside. Xiaoling breathed a sigh of relief after entering the room, and threw the gauze shawl she was wearing on the bed. Li Lei dug out their suitcases and changed clothes non-stop. He changed his and revealing leather clothes into relatively conservative styles. Expensive, cold, and soft black leather wrapped his chest, abdomen and thighs. There is a beauty that is completely different from before, but still wild. Even though she was still pretending to be worried, Xiaoling was still a little shaken when she saw such Li Lei. This man, no matter where he is so outstanding that people cannot take their eyes away. Go back and let you see enough. Li Lei noticed her gaze and said teasingly, then lowered his head and kissed her gently, "I will go check out the places that are not open to guests, and then come back to find you." She nodded, told him to be careful, and watched him leave. It took Li Lei more than 2 hours to go. Just when Xiaoling was restless and didn't know what to do, he came back without anyone noticing. She hurriedly greeted him, "How are you? Are you okay? Have you found Xiao Hui's whereabouts?" Li Lei nodded, "In a cell on the 3rd floor of the ship, he is being held alone. It seems that he only suffered some superficial injuries. The little guy is in good spirits." Xiaoling was relieved. Xiao Hui was fine. It was great. But, immediately my heart raised again, how should we save him? Li Lei has obviously considered this issue. This ship is on the high seas. Every day, only the helicopters from Jiyuan can take off and land. Tourists who want to leave the ship must take their helicopters. Even if we take Xiao Hui, the only way to be rescued from the cage is so. We need to create a legitimate identity for Xiao Hui and bring him to the helicopter justifiably. Li Lei said to Xiaoling, "Tonight's auction will auction a girl about the same age as Xiao Hui, Xiaoling. You go and buy one so that when we get on the helicopter, there will be 3 spots." Xiaoling understood what he meant. "You mean, let Xiao Hui replace the little girl and board the helicopter with us as my newly bought slave?" "Yes," Li Lei said, "we can dress up the little girl as Xiao Hui and put her in the prison where he is held. In this way, No one will notice anything is wrong in a short time. Xiaoling hesitated, would this be too cruel to the little girl? Li Lei's voice was a little cold, Xiaoling, there are so many people in this world, you can't protect them. All we can protect are the few closest to us. That little girl was caught by the people from paradise. From that moment on, your fate has been decided. Sooner or later, you will be bought by a pervert, and you cannot change it. Xiaoling said softly, if I buy her and take her away, she will be free. Li Lei said, let her take Xiao Hui's place, don't blame him for being cold-hearted, but he was born in a wealthy family. Growing up, he had seen a lot of crueler things, and he had learned it early. How to choose. Xiaoling bit her lip, it was Xiao Hui who took her place. Li Lei sneered coldly, if it weren't for Xiao Hui, would you still be here or buy her? Xiaoling stopped talking. She knew very well that Li Lei was right. With or without her, the fate of the little girl who was about to be bought would not change, and she could not put her own son in danger just for the sake of temporary compassion. People are selfish, and she is not noble in the face of blood and family ties. Just follow your plan, she said. Li Lei hugged her gently, don't be sad. She shook her head, indicating that she was fine, but her depressed mood was still written on her face. Bliss Paradise will not exist for long, Li Lei comforted her and said, when I go back this time, I will send people to deal with this organization now that he is throwing a taboo, and it is the critical moment when Xiao Hui is about to recognize his family. He will not hope was full of twists and turns, so there was no head-on confrontation with an organization with a huge background like G Paradise. However, since you dare to provoke his woman and son, you must be prepared to bear his wrath. The paradise will soon be destroyed. Xiaoling felt better now. The two rested in the room and had dinner. Li Lei was still wearing the same clothes he wore when he inspected the prison, but had put on a new mask. If he hadn't admitted it himself, few people would have been able to tell that he was the male slave besides Xiaoling. He said goodbye to Xiaoling, and the two of them split into two groups. She went to the auction house to bid for the little girl, while he went to the underground prison to rescue Xiao Hui. Xiaoling, draped in black gauze, walked alone along the luxurious aisle of the cruise ship and walked into the auction house on 12-centimeter stiletto heels. She got her auction number and sat down. There were already many guests gathered inside the venue, each wearing leather clothes and masks, making it difficult to see their true colors. Under the dim light, there are ghosts, and there is a strange feeling of terror. Xiaoling endured her discomfort and waited for the auction to start. An auctioneer wearing a fishnet suit walked onto the stage and introduced the first lot of the night in a sickly and enthusiastic tone. It was a young man with pale skin and a pair of big blue eyes as innocent as a deer. His eyes were filled with tears, as if he was afraid of his next fate, but he was unable to resist. The auctioneer introduced his origin, characteristics, and the skills he has acquired after being domesticated. There are many words that Xiaoling barely understands, but she shudders instinctively. She tensed her back slightly and sat up straighter. At this moment, she wished that Li Lei was beside her so that she would not be alone in this ghostly environment. Unfortunately, he has his mission. And she has things she must face. The auctioneer began to bid. The pale boy's base price was 1 million, which soon soared to 5 million, and was finally sold for 7.5 million. Then, the auctioneer said in the same tone that was so fanatical, please the lucky buyer of item number 1, our Mr. Shark number 18, come up to the stage and take back your item. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 760. Chapter 760 The Mysterious Bidder. The audience gave him warm applause. Xiaoling saw a fat man wearing a green-faced fanged mask come onto the stage. Regardless of the pale boy's weak struggle, he dragged him off like a victor dragging his trophy. Xiaoling's hand clenched slightly. At that moment, She really wanted to spend money to buy all the remaining items to prevent those young girls from suffering such a tragic fate. However, she knew very well that she could not do this. She warned herself to be calm and low-key and not attract attention. Only in that way could she successfully rescue Xiaohui. Li Lei is right, after returning home, we should overturn the paradise. Such a criminal organization should not exist. She took a deep breath calmly, controlled her emotions, and waited for the next auction. The auction continued, and the lots were dragged onto the stage one by one. After a series of enthusiastic introductions and biddings, they were brought back to the audience by their respective owners. Finally, it was the turn of a little girl in the list. Xiaoling sat up straight and held her breath. She will participate in the bidding in this round. If the bidding in this round fails, there will be a second girl to choose from. If she does not participate in this round, then she can only choose the second girl, which is too risky. The auctioneer quickly quoted a price. It's really a fresh product. You know, all countries now have strict control over children. It's not easy to get such a beautiful and cute little girl. The lowest price is 8 million. He is 8 times taller than the original boy. However, there are still many people flocking to it, and bids of 10 million and 13 million are constantly heard. Xiaoling also stretched out her fair and slender fingers and entered the price code on the bidding machine in front of her seat. 20 million. 20 million, the auctioneer shouted, 20 million at a time, 22, 30 million. The auctioneer's tone became excited. I really didn't expect that a customer would pay 30 million at once. Is there anyone else who wants to follow? 30 million once. 30 million twice. 3,000, 32 million. It was Xiaoling, who added another 2 million to the unknown opponent's bid of 30 million. She frowned a little. The situation seemed not good. The previous auctions of several boys and girls had been stable, and the price increases were also gradual. There is nothing special about the auction stage in front of you, so how could someone suddenly raise the price by 10 million? Just as I was thinking deeply, over there, the mysterious opponent made another bid. 40 million. This time, the whole place was in commotion. Although most of the guests on this cruise ship are wealthy people, and they are not short of tens of millions, it is still a bit exaggerated to pay this price for a little girl who looks only averagely beautiful. Even the auctioneer shouted, 40 million. Will it be the highest price tonight? I'm so excited, I'm shaking all over. Is there anyone else following me? Is there anyone else following me? He counted down, 40 million once. 40 million twice. Xiaoling pressed 43 million. 43 million, the auctioneer shouted excitedly. 50 million, the mysterious man increased the price again. This time, Xiaoling's face didn't look good. She had to give up on this little girl, otherwise, if she was photographed at such a crazy price, she would definitely become the focus of everyone's attention. At that time, it will be inconvenient to sneak out with Xiaohui. So, as the auctioneer counted down, she did not increase the price this time. The little hammer fell, and the girl who was auctioned was determined to own it with a net worth of 50 million. The auctioneer's provocative tone sounded, "Congratulations to the distinguished guest number 23, Mr. Wild Wolf, for taking the photo of this little girl. Please ask Mr. Wild Wolf to come up to the stage and take away your lot." Off stage, in the dark guest seats, Savage Wolf bowed to the man next to him, his voice trembling. "Well, Mr. Li Feng, I will go and bring your lot back." He sighed in his heart as to why he was so unlucky to sit in Li Feng's house. Next to this pervert, he was forced to help Li Feng bid for the little girl. No one dares to provoke this pervert Li Feng, he will cry. Li Feng's narrow eyes flashed, and his tone was as smooth as a snake. "Go quickly, don't let my little baby find out that you are accepting the award on behalf of someone else." As he said that, he licked the corners of his bright red lips with his tongue. Wild Wolf felt goosebumps all over his body, and he hurriedly went to the stage to receive people. Li Feng smiled in the shadow and whispered, "My little darling, I didn't expect you to go deep into such a place. Come, play a game with me, hee hee, hee hee, hee 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 hee." Xiaoling looked at the people who came to the stage to receive the award. Looks like he is just an ordinary man. I really don't know what is so crazy about him that he spends so much effort to bid for a little girl. Maybe. Is this someone's special hobby? Thinking of this, she felt nauseous again and felt uncomfortable all over. All she could do now was pray, praying that the man would be satisfied after buying this little girl and would no longer compete with her for another little girl. However, things backfired. Another little girl had a starting price of 10 million. When Xiaoling offered 15 million, she was immediately asked to bid 30 million. The whole place was in a state of excitement. Although, in every auction, because there were only a few children, they could always fetch more expensive prices than other slaves, but it was rare for the prices to skyrocket like this. The whole audience was waiting to see if anyone would continue to follow the price. Xiaoling doesn't look very good looking, but she is bound to win this little girl. 40 million. She no longer hid it and started fighting with the mysterious guest. The mysterious guest, 50 million. 60 million. It's not that she wants to be in the limelight, but that once she can't buy the child, she won't have a suitable disguise to rescue Xiaohui. At this moment, she can't care about so much anymore. 80 million. The other party said calmly. 100 million, Xiaoling followed the price. 100 million. The whole audience was shocked. In previous auctions, there were many slaves sold for as high as 100 million. However, that one was the best, but what about the little girl in front of me? There isn't much that stands out. Who has so much money that he's so worried? Someone was already whispering. Isn't that true? Another person asked. 100 million to buy such a child, isn't it stupid? You're new here, right? The voice of the conversation spread thinly. Over there, the auctioneer banged the hammer excitedly. 100 million once. 100 million twice. Is anyone else following? Is anyone following? However, there was silence in the venue. The wild wolf, who was bidding for Li Feng, looked at the charming man beside him with trepidation. Mr. Li, do we want to continue following? Continue to follow. Li Feng had a strange smile on his face and shook his finger. 3 times 100 million, the auctioneer's hammer finally came down. Now, I declare that this little girl belongs to. End of this chapter.